Your supermarket vegetable aisle looks nothing like what Victorian farmers grew. Walk through any produce section today, and you'll see the same 20 vegetables repeated endlessly. Tomatoes, lettuce, carrots, broccoli. Victorian kitchen gardens told a different story. Household account books and seed catalogues from the 1800s list dozens of vegetables that have nearly vanished from cultivation. These crops fed families through harsh winters, provided crucial nutrition, and offered flavors we've completely lost. Let's explore the vegetables that Victorian farmers relied on and see what we've been missing. Skirret. Skirret roots look like a bundle of white carrots tied together, each about finger thick. These sweet, nutty-tasting roots were essential winter vegetables in Victorian gardens. The plant produces clusters of tuberous roots that can be boiled, roasted, or added to stews. Country estates planted skirret in dedicated beds, harvesting from October through March when fresh vegetables were scarce. Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management from 1861 includes multiple skirret recipes, treating it as commonplace as potatoes. Boil the roots until tender, serve them with butter and pepper, add them to meat stews for sweetness and bulk. The flavor combines parsnip sweetness with a hint of carrot, but more delicate than either. Middle-class households with kitchen gardens served it regularly at winter dinners, especially those who couldn't afford imported vegetables. Skirret vanished primarily because the roots are fiddly to clean. Each cluster contains a tough, woody core that must be removed before eating. Commercial farming had no patience for vegetables requiring individual attention. By the early 1900s, seed catalogues stopped listing it. If you're still here after learning about vegetables with woody cores, you might as well subscribe. It gets weirder. Alexanders. Before celery became common, Alexanders filled that role in British cooking. This robust plant grows wild along coastal areas, producing thick stems, leaves, and roots, all edible. Medieval monastery gardens cultivated Alexanders extensively, and the tradition continued into Victorian times. Kitchen gardens purchased Alexander's seeds regularly through the 1840s. The plant thrived in British soil and required minimal care. The entire plant found uses in the kitchen. Young stems were blanched and eaten like celery. Leaves went into soups and stews. Roots were boiled as vegetables. The flavor resembles celery but stronger, slightly bitter with peppery notes. One particular advantage was timing. Alexander's produces tender shoots in February and March, during the hungry gap, when winter storage vegetables ran low, but spring crops hadn't matured. Early spring harvests filled this crucial gap. The vegetable faded when celery cultivation became more reliable. Celery offered milder flavor and better texture. By 1900, Alexander's returned to being considered a weed rather than a crop, despite centuries of cultivation. Scorzonera. Scorzonera produces long, black-skinned roots that look vaguely threatening but taste remarkable. Victorian seed catalogues called it winter asparagus for its delicate flavor. The roots can grow over a foot long, with black bark covering white flesh. Deep, sandy soil and autumn planting produced the best spring harvests. Upper-class Victorian meals featured scorzonera regularly. The roots were traditionally boiled, then the skins slipped off to reveal the white interior. Butter sauce, cream, or baked gratins accompanied them at dinner. The flavor profile sets scorzonera apart from other root vegetables, oyster-like, with earthy sweetness and subtle complexity. Some recipe books called it oyster plant, though that name also applied to salsify, a related vegetable. Victorian doctors recommended scorzonera for digestive ailments and general vigor. Whether these benefits were real or imagined, they made the vegetable popular among health-conscious households. Commercial agriculture abandoned scorzonera because the roots bruise easily and the black skin looks unappealing. Modern consumers expect vegetables to look clean and attractive. Long, black, dirt-covered roots failed that test. Good King Henry. This leafy green vegetable served as a spinach substitute for centuries before actual spinach became common. The plant grows wild across Britain. and Victorian cottage gardeners cultivated it in every available space. Good King Henry produces edible leaves, shoots, and flower buds. Early summer shoots can be prepared like asparagus. Mature leaves cook like spinach. Even the unopened flower buds serve as a broccoli substitute. 3 vegetables in one plant. The name supposedly honors King Henry IV of France, though the good distinguishes it from Bad Henry, a poisonous relative. Victorian gardening books carefully warned readers to identify the plant correctly. Nutritionally, Good King Henry surpasses modern spinach in iron and vitamin content. Recent analysis of Victorian vegetables shows significantly higher nutrient levels than modern equivalents, partly due to soil quality, but also selective breeding priorities. Cottage gardeners loved it for reliability. Plant it once, and it returns year after year. The leaves can be harvested continuously from spring through autumn without killing the plant. The vegetable disappeared when commercial spinach cultivation made fresh greens available year-round. Good King Henry's slightly stronger flavor and tougher texture couldn't compete with the milder, more tender modern spinach varieties developed for mass production. Sea kale. Sea kale grows wild along Britain's coastlines, but Victorian gardeners cultivated it as a premium vegetable comparable to asparagus in status and price. The cultivation method involved forcing the plants to grow in darkness, producing white, tender stems. Covering plants with special terracotta pots called sea kale pots excluded light. Gardeners banked soil around them and carefully timed the harvest. Estate gardens dedicated entire beds to sea kale, often in walled gardens where temperature could be controlled. The forced stems appeared at dinner parties as luxury vegetables, served with butter or cream sauce. The flavor falls somewhere between asparagus and celery, with a nutty sweetness. Victorian recipe books include sea kale preparations ranging from simple boiling to elaborate gratins. Mrs. Beeton provides instructions for blanching, sautéing, and serving it with various sauces. London's Covent Garden charged high prices for sea kale during its brief winter season. Only upper and middle-class households could afford it regularly, though cottage gardeners sometimes grew small amounts for sale or special occasions. The labor-intensive cultivation made sea kale impractical for modern agriculture. Commercial farms abandoned crops requiring individual pot placement and careful forcing. By the 1930s, sea kale had nearly vanished from cultivation despite being indigenous and perfectly suited to British climate. Cardoon. Cardoons look like enormous, silvery-grey celery plants, sometimes reaching 6 feet tall. Victorian kitchen gardens grew them, regularly, dedicating substantial space to their cultivation. The edible portion is the thick leaf stalks, which require blanching to reduce bitterness. Gardeners tied the leaves together and wrapped them in straw or paper for several weeks before harvest. This autumn task was essential but labor-intensive. Cardoons demand particular cooking. The stalks must be cleaned carefully, stringy fibers removed, then boiled until tender. Victorian cookbooks include multiple cardoon recipes, suggesting they appeared regularly enough to need variety in preparation. The flavor combines artichoke and celery notes with distinctive bitterness. Recipe books from the 1870s recommend serving cardoons with rich sauces or braising them in meat stocks to balance the bitterness. Italian and French immigrants to Britain maintained cardoon cultivation longer than native British gardeners. The vegetable remained common in Mediterranean cooking, and immigrant communities grew it in urban allotments well into the 20th century. Modern agriculture rejected cardoons for obvious reasons. They're enormous, require individual blanching, need careful cleaning, and taste bitter unless properly prepared. Supermarkets want vegetables that look good and require no preparation knowledge. Cardoons failed every requirement. Orache. Orache, also called mountain spinach, produces colorful leaves ranging from green to deep red. Victorian seed catalogues offered multiple varieties, calling it superior to common spinach for summer growing. The plant tolerates hot, dry conditions better than regular spinach, which tends to bolt in summer heat. This made it ideal for continuous summer harvests when spinach became unavailable. Orache worked interchangeably with spinach in Victorian kitchens. The leaves can be eaten raw in salads when young or cooked like spinach when mature. Some recipe books specifically called for orache in dishes where the red variety's color added visual appeal. Nutritional content equals or exceeds spinach. The leaves contain high levels of vitamins and minerals, particularly the darker red varieties. Victorian medical journals occasionally mentioned orache as beneficial for various ailments, though these claims lack modern verification. Cottage gardeners found it nearly indestructible. Plant seeds in spring, harvest continuously all summer, and let some plants go to seed for next year's crop. The plant self-seeds enthusiastically, sometimes becoming weedy. Commercial agriculture dropped orache when year-round spinach cultivation became possible. Modern refrigeration and global shipping made seasonal limitations irrelevant. Orache offered no advantages once spinach became available constantly, and its tendency to self-seed made it problematic for mechanical farming. Hamburg parsley. Hamburg parsley looks like a white carrot but tastes distinctly of parsley. Victorian kitchen gardens treated it as essential, growing it alongside regular parsley for the dual harvest of leaves and roots. Autumn planting produces roots ready for winter harvest and storage. The roots can be grated raw, boiled, roasted, or added to soups and stews. Recipe books from the 1860s include Hamburg parsley in numerous dishes. Boiling the roots until tender, then serving them with butter and pepper was common. Raw grated roots added a sharp, parsley-intense flavor to salads. The leaves serve identically to regular parsley, meaning a single plant provides two distinct vegetables. Seed purchases show continuous cultivation throughout the Victorian era. The roots store well through winter, keeping in sand or cool cellars for months. Victorian household management guides recommend storing Hamburg parsley roots alongside carrots and parsnips for winter use. Modern supermarkets abandoned Hamburg parsley because consumers found it confusing. The roots look like carrots but taste like parsley. Marketing teams prefer vegetables with obvious identities. The fact that it offers leaves and roots counted as a complication rather than a benefit in commercial agriculture. Rampion. Rampion produces edible roots and leaves, though Victorians primarily cultivated it for the roots. These pale, turnip-like roots grow in clusters and taste sweet with a slightly nutty flavor. Spring planting produces roots by autumn. The plant thrives in most soil types and requires minimal care. Raw roots were sliced thinly and added to winter salads for crunch and sweetness. Cooked roots were boiled until tender, then dressed with oil and vinegar or served with butter. The leaves also found use in salads, particularly in spring when young and tender. Victorian recipe books mention rampion leaves as an alternative to lettuce, though less common. Literary references suggest rampion had cultural significance beyond mere nutrition. The Brothers Grimm fairy tale Rapunzel takes its name from this vegetable. The German word for rampion is Rapunzel. The story revolves around a pregnancy craving for rampion stolen from a witch's garden. Rampion vanished because it offered no advantages over more familiar vegetables. The roots taste pleasant, but no better than radishes or turnips. The leaves work fine in salads, but regular lettuce proved easier to grow and more productive. Commercial farming eliminated vegetables that were merely fine in favor of crops with clear advantages. Salsify. Salsify roots look like thin white parsnips covered in hair-like roots. Victorian gardeners called it vegetable oyster, for its supposedly oyster-like flavor when cooked properly. Seed catalogues from the 1870s listed salsify varieties regularly, calling it a valuable winter vegetable. The roots can be harvested from October through March, providing fresh vegetables during difficult winter months. Cultivation required deep soil and autumn planting. The plant needed consistent moisture but good drainage. The roots take several months to develop, making it a commitment crop. Victorian cookbooks provide numerous salsify recipes. Boiling the roots, Then serving them in cream sauce or with butter was standard. Some recipes suggest frying sliced salsify roots after boiling. Others add them to stews or bake them in gratins. The oyster flavor claim appears repeatedly in Victorian food writing. Whether the roots actually taste like oysters remains debatable. Some insisted the resemblance was striking, others found it barely noticeable. London's vegetable markets sold salsify throughout the Victorian era, though never as common as carrots or parsnips. The price remained relatively high, suggesting limited supply or specialized demand. Commercial agriculture abandoned salsify for practical reasons. The roots grow slowly, require deep cultivation, and look distinctly unappealing with their hairy exterior. Modern consumers rejected vegetables requiring that much benefit of the doubt. The vegetable oyster marketing couldn't overcome appearance issues. Black salsify. Black salsify, despite the similar name, is a distinct plant from the scorzonera mentioned earlier, though they're closely related and often confused. Victorian seed catalogues sometimes listed them separately, sometimes together. The roots grow similarly long and thin, with black skin covering white flesh. Deep soil, autumn planting, spring harvest, the same requirements as scorzonera. Victorian kitchens prepared black salsify identically to regular salsify, boiling until tender, slipping off the black skin, and serving with butter or cream sauce. Recipe books occasionally distinguish between the two salsify types, but most treat them interchangeably. The flavor profiles differ subtly. Black salsify tastes slightly earthier and less sweet than white salsify. Some cookbooks specify which type to use in particular dishes, suggesting the distinction mattered to accomplished cooks. Both salsify types served similar functions: winter vegetables that could be harvested fresh rather than stored. The roots remain in the ground through winter, harvested as needed, which meant they required no storage space or preservation work. Black salsify disappeared for the same reasons as its white relative. Long, black, dirt-covered roots with hairy exteriors fail modern aesthetic standards. The cultivation time and space requirements made it uneconomical for commercial farming. Chard. Modern supermarkets sell Swiss chard, usually in green or rainbow varieties. Victorian gardens grew dozens of distinct chard varieties, each with different colors, flavors, and growing characteristics. Seed catalogues from the 1860s listed chard varieties including white-ribbed, red-ribbed, yellow-ribbed, silver, and Chilean. Each variety received separate catalogue entries with distinct descriptions and recommended uses. Different chard varieties served different purposes in Victorian kitchens. White-ribbed chard went into dishes where color didn't matter. Red varieties added color to salads. Yellow chard appeared in specific recipes, suggesting distinct flavor. The cultivation advice varied by variety. Some chard types tolerated frost well and provided winter harvests. Others grew best in summer heat. Victorian gardeners selected varieties based on climate and intended harvest season. Nutritional content varied considerably between varieties. Modern analysis of heirloom chard types shows significant differences in vitamin and mineral levels. Victorian gardeners likely recognized these differences through experience, though they lacked scientific understanding. Modern commercial agriculture standardized chard production to just a few varieties that ship well and look attractive. The dozens of Victorian varieties offered no commercial advantages once we stopped caring about subtle flavor differences or specific growing characteristics. Home gardeners occasionally grow heirloom chard varieties, but they've vanished from mainstream agriculture. Turnip-rooted celery. Modern celeriac has Victorian ancestors that looked and tasted quite different. Seed catalogues from the 1850s listed multiple turnip-rooted celery varieties, each producing distinctly shaped and flavored roots. Victorian celeriac varieties ranged from smooth-skinned to heavily rooted, from small and round to large and irregular. Different varieties suited different purposes, some for fresh use, others for storage, some for specific cooking methods. The flavors varied noticeably. Some varieties tasted strongly of celery with earthy undertones. Others offered milder, sweeter profiles. Victorian recipe books occasionally specified which celeriac variety to use, suggesting cooks understood these distinctions. Cultivation requirements differed between varieties. Some turnip-rooted celery types tolerated poor soil and neglect. Others demanded rich soil, consistent watering, and careful blanching. Gardeners selected varieties based on their soil conditions and available labor. Storage characteristics varied substantially. Some celeriac varieties kept well through winter in cool cellars. Others deteriorated quickly and needed immediate use after harvest. Estate gardens specified which varieties went into winter storage and which got used fresh. Modern commercial breeding standardized celeriac to a few reliable varieties, optimized for size, yield, and shipping durability. The Victorian. Diversity offered more options but required more knowledge. Commercial agriculture eliminated that complexity in favor of one-size-fits-all varieties. Winter purslane. Winter purslane, also called miner's lettuce, provided Victorian gardeners with fresh salad greens during the cold months when regular lettuce couldn't survive. The plant produces small, round leaves on delicate stems, often with a leaf that encircles the stem like a collar. The leaves taste mild and slightly lemony, offering refreshing contrast to heavy winter foods. Cold frame cultivation or outdoor growing in mild climates worked well. The plant tolerates frost and actually prefers cool weather. Autumn planting produces harvestable leaves through winter and early spring. Victorian recipe books include winter purslane in salads, sometimes alone, more often mixed with other ingredients. The leaves were also added to soups just before serving, providing fresh green flavor and visual appeal to winter meals. Nutritional content proved valuable during winter months. The leaves contain vitamin C and other nutrients that helped prevent scurvy and other deficiency diseases common in winter when fresh vegetables were scarce. Cottage gardeners found it nearly indestructible. Plant it once and it self-seeds for years. Some gardeners complained it became weedy, spreading beyond intended areas. This self-seeding habit created maintenance issues. Commercial agriculture abandoned winter purslane when year-round lettuce production became standard. The plant's small leaves made harvesting labor-intensive. Modern shoppers expect year-round access to regular lettuce. Winter purslane offered advantages only in seasonal contexts that no longer exist for commercial farming. Mangold. Mangold, commonly called mangelwurzel, was primarily grown as animal feed, but Victorian cottage gardeners also used it as human food during lean times. The roots grow enormous, sometimes reaching 20 pounds, and store well through winter. Agricultural journals from the 1850s called mangold essential for winter livestock feeding, but poor families also relied on them. The roots taste similar to beetroot, but less sweet and more earthy. They require long cooking to become palatable. Victorian workhouse menus listed mangold in institutional meals, suggesting it fed the very poor when nothing else was available. Some Victorian recipe books include mangold preparations, though usually with disclaimers about their humble status. One 1870s cookbook notes, "In times of scarcity, mangolds may be used for human consumption, though they are principally suitable for cattle." The cultivation was straightforward and productive. Mangold grew in poor soil where other vegetables struggled. A small plot could produce winter food for an entire family, plus feed for any animals they kept. The stigma of poverty attached itself to mangold. Using animal feed as human food marked families as desperate. This social association killed mangold's use in human diets. Once economic conditions improved, people abandoned vegetables associated with hardship. Modern agriculture still grows mangolds for animal feed, but the varieties have diverged from those Victorian gardeners would recognize. The old dual-purpose varieties that worked for both animals and humans have vanished, replaced by specialized animal fodder. The bigger picture. These 15 vegetables represent a fraction of what Victorian gardens produced. Seed catalogues from the 1800s list hundreds of vegetable varieties that have since vanished from cultivation. The disappearance followed predictable patterns. Vegetables that looked odd, required careful handling, or needed specific cooking knowledge couldn't survive commercial agriculture's requirements. Modern food systems prioritized appearance, shipping durability, and convenience over flavor, nutrition, or diversity. Some losses were inevitable. Vegetables requiring intensive hand labor make no sense when labor costs rise. Others disappeared because modern breeding produced genuinely superior alternatives. But many vanished simply because commercial agriculture decided they were too much trouble. The nutritional consequences deserve attention. Modern vegetable breeding focused on yield, appearance, and shelf life. Flavor and nutrition became secondary concerns. Studies comparing modern vegetables to their Victorian equivalents consistently show lower nutrient levels today. We grow more food, but each bite contains less nutrition. The knowledge loss compounds the problem. Victorian gardeners understood how to grow, store, and prepare these vegetables. Recipe books, gardening guides, and household accounts preserve some information, but practical knowledge largely disappeared with the last people who grew these crops regularly. Some vegetables are making small comebacks. Seed preservation organizations maintain heirloom varieties. Small-scale farmers at farmers' markets occasionally grow forgotten vegetables. Home gardeners experiment with historic crops. These efforts remain niche rather than mainstream. The infrastructure for growing diverse vegetables has largely vanished. Modern commercial farms are set up for mechanical harvesting of standardized crops. Supermarkets want vegetables that ship well and have long shelf life. Consumers expect produce that looks perfect and requires no preparation knowledge. These systems make Victorian vegetable diversity nearly impossible to recreate at commercial scale. So, the next time you walk through a supermarket produce section, remember there's more to vegetable cultivation than the standard 20 crops we see today. Victorian farmers knew that, and they kept their families fed with vegetables we've completely forgotten. Which of these forgotten vegetables would you want to try? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this look at lost Victorian food traditions, give the video a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories about how people really ate in the past. Thanks for watching.